All right. I guess we can get started now. My name is Ed Finkler, and this is a talk called Open Sourcing Mental Illness. It really started coming out of a podcast that I did with a friend of mine, Chris Hartjes. We do a podcast called Development Hell, and I had a really kind of a rough experience. I've struggled with mental illness my whole life, anxiety and depression. And last year at a conference, I had a bunch of things go wrong at once, and I really got in a bad funk about stuff. I use a CPAP. I have to sleep with a CPAP, and I forgot my CPAP, which was awful. And so I had a lot of trouble sleeping. If you ever have sleep apnea and you have to use one of those, you know that really sucks when you don't have it. I also forgot some of my medication that I take. And I ended up getting sick, probably because I didn't get enough sleep. And it was just this really, really awful, put me in this really dark place. And I was kind of thinking about that for a little bit after I'd gotten through that. And decided to talk about this on the podcast that we do. Now, our podcast is normally we talk about development stuff, PHP, MySQL, Python, Ruby stuff, testing stuff, and things like that. And it's usually kind of jokey atmosphere and stuff like that. And so I talked to Chris and said, hey, I'd like to talk about mental illness and depression and anxiety issues that I've had. And he said, well, that doesn't sound funny, but I guess we could do that. So he said, yeah, sure. He was really super supportive of it. And we just got this huge response. It was by far the biggest response we've gotten on the podcast. Lots of people talking about it, sharing it, stuff like that. And for a while, I kind of kicked around what I wanted to do with this. I felt like I sort of kind of hit on something that a lot of people, it connected with a lot of people. And I decided the best idea was just to kind of keep talking about this. And by talking about this, help people understand what it's like, help people who are going through this understand that they're not alone. And at the end game, really, I guess, is to end the stigma that we have with mental illness, about discussing it openly and feeling comfortable about that. And so in that way, we can start treating it better. So who am I? My name is Ed Finkler. I work for a company called Fictive Kin. I work remote. Our whole team's remote. I've been doing open source development for a long time, doing PHP for like 14, 15 years, doing more Python, a lot of JavaScript lately, stuff like that. I'm a dad and I'm a husband. I'm a developer type person. Occasionally I write music, and I'm a big nerd, and I really like movies and stuff. I can nerd out on a bunch of stuff like that. But I also have a mental illness, or I guess really a couple. I'm just a person. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trained to be a therapist, any kind of real expert in this area. The only knowledge I really have is anecdotal, from my own experiences, from experiences of friends of mine, things I've read and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. I'm just here really to talk about what it's like to have a mental illness and talk about it from my perspective as a developer, as a family member, as a human being, So I want to talk a little bit about my diagnoses. The main thing I deal with right now is something called generalized anxiety disorder. Basically, it means that I get super anxious and freaked out in situations where most people, or they might call neurotypical people, don't get anxious and freaked out as much, at least in situations. And it's not kind of like, oh, I'm kind of not comfortable with this. It's like a paralyzing, I cannot do this kind of thing stuff. Like, I remember a good example of that was, there was some friends of mine who were getting together at a local bar, and I'd never been to that bar before. And they were saying, oh, yeah, well, we'll get together at 7, so just come on over. Well, I'd never been in there. And even though I knew my friends were in there, I stopped in front of the bar. I parked and stopped and kind of walked up and stopped in front of the bar. And there were two doors, and I didn't know, like a door over here and a door over here. I didn't know which one to go into, and I realized that when I got in there, I didn't really know like exactly where they'd be, and they'd wander around and stuff like that. And I almost just decided to go back to my car and go home, because it was silly. But I mean, and I was very conscious of the fact that this is ridiculous. So I should just walk in and look around for them. Who gives a shit, right? But it didn't work that way for me. It was this like crippling, paralyzing thing that held me back, where I was so scared of the fact that I didn't know exactly what to do. Like, I didn't know the etiquette of this place. A lot of bars, it's kind of like, well, you sort of have to know the nomenclature and you know the people to talk to and stuff like that. And so, as a consequence, that was something that was really crippling for me and debilitating for me. It keeps me from doing stuff. And that was really, really hard. And that's like an example of stuff that I usually kind of deal with every day. Like, there's just little things that happen like that. And if I'm not already intimately familiar with it, and I'm not in my comfort zone with the things that I know, it's hard for me to hit these new things. And to sort of, it's stuff that you would think most people, it's like, what's the big deal? It's, you know, whatever, go on, it's fine. But I'm intimidated by it. Like, so intimidated that it's debilitating. I also have, I've dealt with depression for a long time. I dealt with depression more, I think, when I was a teenager, and I think now I kind of feels like it's sort of more anxiety, but there's depression, of course, related to that, and those things are often very interrelated. A lot of people who have anxiety issues deal with depression as well, and in a lot of ways, I'm not going to go deeply into the biology. There are smarter people who can do that, but depression and anxiety, depression itself is really a deep stress reaction. So it's similar in a lot of ways to anxiety. It's sort of a fight or flight kind of thing, but it's a different form of that. I also have adult ADD, which is not entirely why I'm talking so fast. It's because this is like a 55-minute talk, and I have a 40-minute slot, and also drink a lot of coffee. But I also do have adult ADD. I take a medication for that called Strattera, which I think is the only one on the market right now, which is on amphetamine. But I do take medication for that, and that helps me to focus, kind of actually get stuff done, and maybe only have like a bad few hours where I screw around and just read news feeds instead of working, instead of, say, a bad 2 weeks where I just read news feeds instead of working. So the medications I take, and I'm going to go through these kind of fast because this isn't as fascinating as stuff. I think Lexapro, if you're familiar with, it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI. This is those class of drugs are really common. If you go to your general practitioner and say, I'm having symptoms that I think is depression, and he says, yeah, that's probably what he'll probably do is he or she will say, well, I'll get you on an SSRI. So it'll be Lexapro or Effexor or Prozac was the first one that was on the market. It was an SSRI. All of them are similar. They work basically the same kinds of way. They keep serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, from being reabsorbed in the body. The idea being that then it keeps sending these messages which sort of keep you in a better mood. They think serotonin is related to that. So I take Lexapro. It's just a relatively newer version of these SSRI drugs. Also take Buspar. Buspar is helpful for treating anxiety disorders and also seems to have a sort of a secondary effect when it's paired with an SSRI. It seems to help the effectiveness of the SSRI. So I also take the Buspar. I take Strattera. I mentioned that before. Strattera is a medication for ADD. It's, I think, again, the only one, at least in the U.S., that is not an amphetamine. Everything else is speed. This is not. It does not have the awesome stuff that you get when you take speed. Like you can talk real fast and you're never hungry and you lose weight and things seem awesome. But it also doesn't have the problems where if you take, say, amphetamines every day, for me, at least I got anxious and upset, and I took it for a month and I couldn't do that stuff anymore. So I switched to Strattera. Strattera is kind of more subtle, but it does seem to help. Then I also take Klonopin, which is a tranquilizer. You might also that's the brand name Klonopin. Clonazepam is the trade name. And it's it's a similar kind of tranquilizer to something like Xanax. They work kind of differently, at least in my experience. I've taken both Xanax and Klonopin. Klonopin kind of lasts longer, calms me down for a while, keeps me from getting anxious for no seemingly obvious reason. But I think Xanax is sort of more powerful, but it comes on faster, but it also drops off faster and sometimes worse when I take it. I kind of like Klonopin better. I think it's a smooth ride, But so I want to talk about kind of what it's like to deal with this. And I think the strongest thing that I feel is that it seems like the emotions that I feel and reactions to situations, things like that. A lot of times it's stuff that would kind of maybe upset people a little bit in some situations. It may make them a little uncomfortable. But I'm much more intense about it, and it tends to come on really fast. And for me, it's like sometimes it feels like I have this emotion that comes on, and it's like a big wave, and there's no way for me to stop it. Like, I don't know exactly how to, like, say, okay, I'm just not going to feel this cool down, dude, it's alright. And when it's really bad, I can't stop it, and I just have to kind of deal with it and wait for it to pass. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Kill Bill, and you hear that, there's that part where, I can't remember her name, but she, grabs Uma Thurman, like, has her sword, and she's, like, suddenly she gets, like, really, really mad, and this sort of alarm sound starts going off with music and stuff like that. It's kind of like that. It's particularly hard when you have this strong emotional reaction to somebody who is just, giving they're just talking, Like, I'm talking to my wife, and we're talking about something maybe isn't the most fun thing in the world, because when you live with somebody for a long time, that sometimes you have things where you have to talk about stuff that's not super comfortable and not fun. And she'll say something, and it triggers an emotion in me, and that is, I know, a completely illogical level of response to it, and I just get super, super, super pissed off. But the problem is, I know that I just have to wait for this to ride out, because if I say anything, I'm going to say something really shitty that I don't really mean, and I don't want to say, and I will just make things worse. And that really sucks, to feel that way. So that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing to deal with. But that's kind of what it's like. And I talk about anxiety. A lot of times, a quote that somebody told me was that I find the challenge to be explained to folks how it's not like their anxiety about a job interview on Mondays. What it is that you have these very clearly and logically, I guess, what I kind of think of more and more as you have a fight or flight reaction to situations that logically you should not be having those. And that is really problematic, because it puts you in a position where it's very hard to overcome, and it starts eating up all your strength and your energy, and you're just freaked out by it, about stuff like that. Like I started about, like going and walking in a bar and seeing friends. I knew my friends were in there. I eventually went in because somebody tweeted me, like direct messaged me, and says, "Hey, we're in the bar." That got me in there, but I was about to leave. A lot of times the anxiety has physical manifestations. In fact, it usually does, because that's the nature of what you're going through. Is you're having you're having a reaction that you would have to a large stress event, but not at the wrong time, basically. So your muscles get tighter. A lot of times I feel like I want to just start running around. And I'm not a runner. So, like, you kind of want to get out, you want to get away from things, you want to get stuff. I have physical manifestations of stuff where, in my body, the big thing for me is I get it feels like like my muscle tenses up at the bottom of my sternum. And it feels kind of like if you have a rope in a big knot and it's like twisting like that. That is how it feels to me when it's bad. I used to have problems with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Thankfully, that's mostly moved away. But that totally fed on itself, because I was constantly afraid that if I was more than 5 minutes away from a bathroom, I would shit my pants. And that is super not fun. And sort of, I guess it doesn't turn you into an agoraphobe, but it makes it almost impossible to travel or go places, or you're worried about it. Like going to the office, I'm like, what if we only have, I've heard other people talk about this, but I've had the same experience too. Somebody's, because I talked about this, and he gave me this example where he has to think about when he's taking a new job, like, what's the bathroom situation like? Like, how easy can it get into? Is there only one bathroom that I can use? Like, and it's only a one-person bathroom, so I can't go. Stuff like that. So for me, I know that IBS was really clearly tied to my anxiety. Thankfully, that moved past that and helped treat the physical symptoms. And it seemed like it calmed down. It seems like it helps, like, when people get older, it seems to get better. But I also know people who have reactions to stress and anxiety so strongly that they have symptoms of heart attacks. A friend of mine has had to go to the emergency room a couple times because he gets these pains in his chest, and I mean, even numbness in his arm and shit like that. And that's like the classic symptoms of men having a heart attack. and he's had the emergency room. It's really debilitating. These things come on. Yeah. The other thing, I have a lot of problems sometimes focusing. Strattera helps me a lot with that, so I've been taking that for a while, and it seems like I do better at that. But I still do have problems with that. And before I was taking that, I would have like whole weeks where I didn't get anything done because I was like, I just can't make myself do something. When I was in school, I had a lot of problems with actually focusing on and getting like homework done. I went to this kind of a progressive education private school, and I don't think I ever got all of my homework done ever. And so I had the third worst GPA in my class, and I had the third best SAT score. So that would, it's just I have a lot of trouble focusing, especially like in school where if I had multiple subjects to handle, that was really hard for me to juggle those kinds of things. A third thing that I go through a lot is these kind of spiraling chains of thought, and I'll get to this is sometimes kind of an interesting advantage in my job, but it's really easy for me to look at some situation that's like, oh, we're gonna get in this situation. Like, hey, let's say I'm going to go to I'm going to fly. I'm going to travel to a conference and give a talk. Well, here's what a classic thing that I would go through is like, okay, if I don't get to the airport on time, I might miss my flight, and then I'm not going to know what to do because I missed my flight. And what if I also, say, forgot my power plug, or I forgot my laptop, or in a couple cases I forgot my CPAP, or forgot any of the 5 medications I have to bring with me, or I have forgot my, I think I said boarding pass. What if I forgot to print out my boarding pass? What if I get on the plane and I forget one of my bags in the airport? What if I can construct this scenario like a strongly negative outcome. I can construct that super fast. And then I start constantly worrying about that. And anxiety kicks in with that because I can sort of form this possibility really fast. And now I'm like, holy shit, if I do this, somehow I'm going to end up in Turkey in jail. And, or I'm like trapped in the airport, they're never going to let me out or something like that. I went to Montreal for the first time I've traveled out of the U.S. on a passport, ever. One time when I was 8, we drove through Canada. That was before we needed a passport. And this is the first time I went to anywhere outside of the U.S. using a passport. And so we flew to Montreal, and I was scared shitless. I was going to get to Montreal. These mofos do not know what I'm saying, and I'm going to get in there, and they're going to stick me in a room with guys with guns, speaking French, and poking me in the back with a barrel. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I just did not know, because especially going to a new airport, and I don't understand how this stuff works in customs. What the fuck is customs? I don't understand that stuff. What do? I don't understand any of that stuff. So thankfully, I worked for a really good group of people, worked with a really good group of people I was able to ahead of time explain to them, this is what I'm worried about, and it would be really nice if we could assign somebody to be my buddy. Now, if I have a buddy, I'm feeling much better. Even if that buddy is not particularly experienced with it, at least it's like I'm with somebody. And I'll get to this, but it's that feeling of isolation. And that's the thing that terrifies me the most, of isolation and not knowing what to do. And so much of this stuff ties into this feeling of isolation, loneliness, and separation from people. But anyway, I construct these outcomes really quickly, and I tend to obsess also on negative events. Like some people you'll hear talking about, I've done better or worse at this, but I know I've had problems in the past obsessing about negative things that happened before, like stressful events or things like that happened in the past. In 3rd grade, there was this spelling workbook we were supposed to be doing for the whole year, and I didn't do most of it because I didn't like doing homework. I did really well, my first 6 years, because I didn't have to try, because I was just good enough to be in advanced classes and shit like that, because there was no homework, and I knew how to do it and figure it out, and that was fine. But so I did this workbook, and I didn't turn it in, and at the end of the year, I was like, holy shit, I've got 100 pages to fill out in 2 days. And of course, I didn't get it done. I don't even remember exactly what happened. But for years, decades after that, I would think of that and feel this strong pang of guilt and anxiety about it. In 3rd grade, about a spelling workbook. This is stupid. It doesn't matter. none of that. I know it doesn't matter, but it didn't change the fact that that's how I felt, and that's how my brain and my body reacts to that. And that's a tough thing, man. Conflict is really upsetting for me. Like, if I feel like I'm in a conversation that starts getting sort of a little bit aggressive, I tend to start losing my temper super fast, and it gets me very, very stressed out and very anxious, and I have a very strong, that kind of fight or flight reaction to it. And this doesn't help because I tend to be the kind of person who sort of feels principled about things, like I should stand up for people who I feel like are kind of getting shit on. At the same time, it is very, very, it puts me in a very bad place in terms of this anxiety and reaction. I can't, like, calmly deal with stuff. I can't, like, say people are kind of being shitty and, trolls and talking about stuff, things like that. I deal with that very poorly because it triggers me really badly with that stuff. A lot of times I have these things called, what they call unwanted thoughts. This is a common thing you'll see where it's like, you start, like, these thoughts that are really inappropriate for the period or things that you really do not want to think about it in a particular situation keep coming up. Like, my note here is, should not be thinking about dick jokes in church. Things like that. There's a comedian, Maria Bamford, and y'all look her up because she struggled with mental illness a lot, and she's talked very openly about it. She talks a lot about unwanted thoughts, about this idea of, like, she was at the aquarium and she saw a starfish, and it was like a starfish balloon, starfish, and look at it, like that, and she was like, I really, like, she started thinking about it, and, like, what if I picked up the starfish and turned it over and kissed its poop hole? Shit like that. Or I have a thing where I'm actually scared of heights, but at the same time, I also have had dreams about, and every time I am there, I start thinking, like, if I'm up to the edge of something, like a balcony or something like that, I start thinking, yeah, what if I jumped over this? Like, what if I did this? And not like, what if I jumped over this? Oh, no, it's like, well, that's really interesting. I kind of want to see what happens. And I'm like, why am I doing this right now? This is a terrible time to do that. But it feels like you can't control it. It's like these things just pop into your head. The big problem with all of this stuff, is that it leads to this feeling of isolation. You feel like you're alone and nobody else is like you. And that is the hardest thing. Because for a long time, when I was diagnosed at 13 with this stuff. I had to leave school in junior high. A really, really shitty junior high experience. With bullying and stuff like that, and I ended up going into like an adolescent psych unit or inpatient care thing for 2 months. And the feeling you get out of that is that the feeling that I had for a long time was that there was just something wrong with me. And I was broken, and I was not made right, and that it's never going to be correct, and I can never function in society correctly. And people don't understand what it's like. I'm different, and nobody understands me. And part of me says, well, it sounds like whining. Well, that's the kind of bullshit talk you hear about that kind of stuff. You tell yourself, even though I know that stuff. But I know that that's bullshit. But there's that feeling that no matter what I do, I always have something that goes wrong where I react incorrectly, and it breaks things, and it sabotages things, and I can't get the job that I want. I can't be as productive as I want. I can't get into the school that I want. I can't because my grades can't be good enough, and I just feel fucked. And I feel like nobody understands it. That's the hardest thing. It's that separation and feeling like nobody understands what it's like. The loneliness is just crushing because you just feel separated from everybody. You can be around a bunch of people and feel as alone as like a person on a deserted island. There's you and these other people, and there's no relation between them. There's not understanding between them. And that leads in, a lot of times, for a lot of people, and it has for me, it leads into things like suicidal ideations, suicidal thoughts, self-mutilation. For me, the things that I did, self-mutilation, it was never like an attempt to really. I don't think it was an attempt to commit suicide. I think for most people who say cut themselves or things like that, it's not an attempt to hurt themselves or not to like kill themselves or sort of practice at it. What it is, at least for me, it was an attempt to express how I felt and how severe it was and how severe it is, because I didn't feel like I knew how to get it across to anybody else. And I still got shit on this. I still got a scar on my hand of shit that I did when I was 13 years old. You can't really see it right now. It's mostly faded, but if I point it out to you, you'll see it where the skin's didn't heal right. Still got, there's a good mark there I probably did in my late 20s. There's another one here. Shit like that. And what I did is pretty minor compared to some people I see, where they just feel like that's the only way they can express. They feel so disconnected. They feel like that's the way that they can express how they feel inside and how traumatic and intense the things are. For me, real suicidal actions are very rare. They only happen in very, very intense stress or emotional situations. I have gotten close, and they were usually in those situations where I felt this really, really, that super intense wave of emotion, usually in a time of very severe conflict. I thought about, driving, slammed down my foot on the accelerator in the car and driving away, pulling out of the driveway because I felt like I just couldn't fucking take this anymore, and pulling away and just thinking that I was just going to turn the wheel and slam into a telephone pole or something like that. Closest thing I ever did was I was in the bathroom, I barricaded myself in there, and I was in my like 30. I had a mouthful of pills. I just held them there in my mouth. And I thought about it. And I thought about, I had a kid who was a year old. I just couldn't do it. Because I couldn't give up on him. But without that, I probably would have done it. Because I didn't, that was the only thing that kept me from doing this. And the tough thing is that, there's this, there's obviously suicide and suicidal ideation, self-mutilation. These kinds of things are really, really hard. But the problem is this shit's going to kill you one way or another. And it's not just because of stuff like that. It's not just because somebody takes a bunch of pills and blows their head or something like that. But even if it doesn't make you do that, the problem is you're going to die sooner because of these issues. Because it actually fucks up your immune system. It gives you all these kind of physical ailments because our understanding of how the brain works and how all of these things work and are interrelated is not complete by any stretch. And you'll find that if you research that and you have to go through therapy or you try different meds or stuff like that, and usually the process is like, well, let's try this, and maybe we'll try this and see how this goes, and we'll try a bunch of shit. And then you also will hopefully not just try meds, but you also do therapy stuff and try different kinds of therapies and work through things like that. There's lots of psychological aspects to it, and there's also biological aspects, but those are tightly intertwined. And the problem is that there's more and more evidence that these feelings of isolation, and how it can trigger anxiety and depression and stress reactions in people that, for example, as we talk about, depression is not this feeling of like, man, I'm just super tired, I'm just going to take it easy. No, what it is actually your body is having a severe reaction to a perceived stress event. So your body processes are actually running really hot, and you're doing a bunch of shit's going on. And so your body is reacting the same way where if it had like a threat, like it had been like an injured animal. I'll get to this. There's a good talk about it. But the key thing is that it actually does things like compromises your immune system. And obviously there's all these conditions that are related to anxiety that we don't know about. High blood pressure, all these heart problems, ulcers, colitis, shit like that. All these things are related to this stuff. And it's just how loneliness affects you dramatically. There's a good article I read in the New Republic, and I'll have to link to it, and there's a link on my website about it, but that anxiety and depression actually raise the mortality rate. So if you are dealing with this, you're probably going to die sooner than somebody who isn't. A quote from that article: "Emotional isolation is ranked as high a risk factor for mortality as smoking." And an interesting thing, it's in that article and it talks about the study. I think it was done in the early mid-90s, I think. And it was gay men with HIV. And they found that gay men who were closeted, you can understand the anxiety and disconnect and loneliness that goes along with being closeted, as opposed to gay men who were open. They did a study with folks like that who had HIV. And those who were closeted died on average 3 years sooner than the people who were open. And there's a lot of evidence that things like cancer metastasizes faster in situations like this or I should say metastasizes slower if you do not have this feeling of disconnect and loneliness, and you're not being, you don't have this warmth and affection and this connection with people around you. There's a really good talk, I think it was given in 2009, by Robert Sapolsky. And if you went to Paul Fenwick's talk, he probably talked about a lot of the stuff that Sapolsky talks about. Sapolsky is a biologist at Stanford. And he says in this that depression is the worst disease you can get. The World Health Organization says depression is the number 4 cause of disability in the world, and that is rising. And over a certain age, it becomes a higher one. The key thing here is that this stuff, it's not just in your brain and independent of that. Your brain and your biological functions are directly interrelated, are interrelated in complex fashions, and negative thoughts impact the way that your biological processes work. And if you are in a state where you're constantly dealing with stress events and your body constantly is putting itself into a stress events scenario, like anxiety, like depression, those kinds of states, it compromises the way that your body functions, the way your immune system functions. And it is much more likely you're going to die sooner. You can, in a lot of cases, if you have that kind of stuff, you just swap 10 years off your life expectancy. And this is really rough. This is fucking rough. And it is, and I put this here because there is no good way for me to transition out of this. That shit is hard, and it is hard to deal with. But that's why I'm here talking about this, because I want to talk about this, because I think that if we are not so scared of talking about this stuff, we're not going to be so isolated, and we're going to start learning how to treat it. So I'm going to talk about this as a developer. And there's actually some strange positives that I've had with the way that my brain works. The one thing is that I'm not a great developer. I'm not a great programmer. I find most like CS stuff under very basic computer science stuff too complex. I don't really understand it. Also, I did shitty in my CS classes. But I'm really good at things like pattern matching, on a basic level. So when I see something, it works like this over here, I can quickly apply that to other situations. And I can iterate on that, and I can apply those patterns to solve problems quickly. And I found that one skill that I have that seems like I do better than a lot of people is I'm able to do that fast. And that's nice. And that's nice, especially with web development, which is kind of usually low CS stuff, but high, like, solving problems stuff. And, like, taking common patterns and applying them in the right way. I talked about how I build these negative outcomes really fast and, like, these spiraling chain of thoughts, like, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. Well, that means that I'm also really good at anticipating potential outcomes for stuff. So, like, if somebody says, well, I'm going to do it this way, and we'll set up the web app so the user has to do X, X, X. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, but that potentially could cause this problem here, because, the user, when they interact with this, they might, might turn them off. And sometimes that's like, it's a minor thing or it's a major thing. But what I found is that I'm oftentimes the only guy who brings that up. And it's probably because I'm able to anticipate those things faster. I'm able to build those outcomes faster. And then a key thing, I think is the best thing for me, is that I'm able to be empathic and supportive of colleagues. I really like helping other people. And that's great for open source, because what I love about open source and the open source culture is learning, and is the shared learning and collaboration. That's what I love about it. And so being able to come and talk to folks about things and know that maybe I'm helping them, even, or or going and learning from them, and that's the awesome thing about it, and I really, really like that. I'm a pretty empathic person, which is problematic in a lot of ways because a lot of times other people's pain kind of puts me in a bad place, and because I take that on, it's hard for me not to. But I also feel like I understand, or a lot of times I can figure out what people are going through and try to help them. And that's really cool. That helps on a lot of levels. So it's really good for me in this kind of line of work. Those things help a lot. I find working with teams, I work remotely, and there's a lot of interesting differences between in-person and remote. One of the things I find is I have to avoid working alone. Like, it helps me to be around people, even if I'm not interacting with them directly. But if I stay home and work, and I'm the only person home, I feel very disconnected from people, and that often puts me in a bad emotional state. It really is important for me to have managers and bosses who are understanding of this stuff, who I can come and talk to and I can trust, and that's a key thing for me. If I don't have that, it's going to be that I'm going to be scared the whole time that they're going to ask me to do something and I'm going to freak out about it. They're going to ask me like, hey, maybe you could fly to and do some. We're going to do a Whitewater Rapids retreat. Maybe you could fly out to Colorado, stuff like that. I'm like, that's terrifying to me. And a lot of people are like, that sounds great. And lots of people, friends of mine, are like that. I'm like, oh my God, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I'd be terrified of that kind of thing. But being able to say, dude, this is terrifying. I can't do this. This is not, and being able to hear like, no, man, it's okay. It's all right. That is amazing. And I don't hear that enough from folks. And that's really important. At conferences and communities, community stuff, I don't really like loud parties with lots of alcohol. It's not like alcohol is fucking devil. Well, it's the devil liquor. But it is, it's not having any problem with people drinking, but a lot of people seem to really enjoy like going to a party, like a big loud party with lots of crap going on. And I can sustain that for about 30 minutes, and then after a while I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I talk about travel. Travel's really scary because it's not the flying. Flying is fine for me. I like flying. I actually kind of enjoy it. I enjoy that feeling of taking off and that pressure being pushed back in your seat. I don't know why. I like it. But it's that preparation of feeling like I have to have all this shit organized or something, everything's going to get fucked up. I got to have all my papers in order, and I've got to make sure I bring all my stuff. And maybe I only brought one pair of underwear, and that, sure, and so all that stuff that freaks me out. And we're going to talk a little bit about techniques. I'm going to kind of rush through this stuff because I think we're running out of time. I will say that I think most people, this is a side note, I think most people self-medicate. They self-medicate in a lot of ways. I think they take alcohol, drink alcohol because, if they're stressed out, they have a drink. And that works fine for a lot of people. And I say, occasionally drink, that's fine. It helps them kind of deal with that stuff. And there's lots of socially acceptable tools that people use, like food and drink and tobacco and stuff like that regulates our mood. And some people regulate their mood that way. Coffee, sure. People do that all the time. Where coffee is, it affects our biological processes in a way that is advantageous for us to wake up and be more productive, things like that. And also probably puts us in a shitty mood sometimes, and that's helpful for a lot of people. I personally think that most illegal drug users are self-medicating, and they're probably self-medicating anxiety or depression issues in most cases. They've had major stress events happen in their life. This is the way that they deal with them. And unfortunately, don't get me on a soapbox, but we're putting them in jail instead of actually training them. I tend to self-medicate with food, and that's why I have a belly. And that's the way that I do. I love sweets. If you put any amount of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream in it, whatever that amount is, I will eat it. If you do not stop me, I will continue to consume it until that amount is gone. So, yeah. The key thing for me that I think a lot of people will tend to, like, if they say, well, I think maybe I have anxiety, depression, things like that, and find them essentials, they'll go to the general practitioner, and they'll talk to them, and the general practitioner will give them a drug, and that's the amount of treatment that they get. And that is, unfortunately, I think, the wrong way to go about this. This is one thing I feel kind of strongly about. I think your first step is you should seek out a therapist who can guide you in forming your approach to how you're going to treat the problems that you have. it's really key. Often that depression or anxiety is really a symptom of emotional and or just purely physical issues that you have. And it's important that you find the root of that. Most general practitioners are not trained in psychological disorders. So they know something, and they'll give you an SSRI out there. It seems like it helps some people, they'll do that. And it's not bad, but the problem is you particularly have to be actively engaged in your own treatment if this is something you're seeking out. So you have to be prepared to do that. So you can't just go to your GP, I don't know, help me out, and then you do it. No, you got to be actively engaged in seeking out and working with somebody who's trained in this. So I really found that it's important to, I would say, find a therapist, psychologist first that you work with, and you say use medication to enhance it. One thing from the Sapolsky talk that Robert Sapolsky said, a quote from that, biological understanding of depression only helps treat about 30% of depressives. If you just treat them on a biological level, the vast majority of them, they don't get better if you ignore the psychological issues. So if you're just taking a drug, it's not actually treating things. Typically, and if anything, it's treating symptoms, it's not actually treating the cause. One thing I want to highlight, a lot of people have success with cognitive behavior therapy. So if you have had issues with anxiety and really have problems with that, I'm going to do the same thing. I haven't done it before, but a lot of people have reported very high success rates with cognitive behavior therapy, which is essentially training yourself on how to deal with that when you feel anxiety coming over you. Like, how do I deal with that? How do I mitigate that? And learning how to do that. And a lot of people have had a lot of success with that. So I would encourage you to seek that out. Obviously, a lot of people take medicine. A lot of people, I think, assume that, I'm going to take one medicine and then I might just stop taking it if I feel better or things like that. Typically, I think that does not work. It certainly does not work in my case. I've had to, over the years, not only take a few different kinds of medications, I often would have to change it based on what was going on in my life, and I felt like maybe this isn't working as well now, things like that. And a lot of times, this isn't something where they have a very direct correlation of understanding of how these processes work. So a lot of times one drug, even though it's in a very similar class to another drug, will work better than another one. So if this doesn't work, maybe I should try this SSRI. Maybe I should try this SSRI with Buspar, and maybe that'll enhance the effects. Maybe I should try, XYZ. There's a lot of different treatments, and you're probably going to have to try different things to figure this out if you do take medication. And you're going to have to try different stuff and figure that out. And it is not something where you just take a couple of weeks and now you figure it out and you're fine. If it works for you, that's great. That's awesome. But my experience has been, in my case, it certainly hasn't been that way. And I think most people who have ongoing chronic issues with this, they are going to work and actively engage with a therapist and a psychiatrist to figure out what's working for them and take different things. I think exercise helps a lot. I'm shitty at exercising. I don't like to. But I do like to get outside. I do like to ride my bike sometimes. And usually just getting outside and walking around helps me a lot. One of the things is that exercise releases endorphins. Endorphins are super awesome at making you feel good and not stressed out. It is not a long-term solution because once those endorphins go away, then you go back to feeling shitty and stressed out and anxious. But it's nice and it can help you in a lot of ways. So I would encourage it. Some people like meditation. I'm not good at it, but it's kind of, if you think of meditation as, in a sense, another form of cognitive behavior therapy where you're trying to kind of train yourself how to deal with these things. Well, it's kind of the same kind of thing. Some people, I can't get, it's way not enough time to do this, but some people have a thing called seasonal affective disorder where they find that not being exposed to sunlight, and particularly the kind of sunlight that has ultraviolet and stuff in it, well, the kind of sunlight does have ultraviolet in it, but the kind of light that has that stuff in it, that their mood shoots down when like in the winter months when it's cloudy and stuff like that. A lot of people find light therapy very helpful for that, so that's something to explore. And then I just say avoidance of triggers. I often find I just have to shut stuff off for a while. I use my Etsy host file to block crap. Like, no, I'm not going to go on Twitter. And I have Hacker News always blocked. Shit like that. Because that shit just makes me angry. And if I'm stressed out or if I've gotten myself into a situation where something's an emotional thing, I have to separate myself. It's not their fault. It's me treating myself correctly and knowing that, no, I can't keep doing this. Because I know I'll keep going back to it and refeed that and like stoke that fire. Crying helps me a lot. A lot of times, I get angry, get pissed off, and really what it is a reaction to fear and anxiety, and that's what it's coming from. And a lot of times what I find is that I'll get to a point and finally it's like the anger subsides a slight bit, and I just cry. And I cry because that's really what I'm feeling, because I'm feeling scared and alone. And crying expresses that and gets that out, and I feel so much better when it does. I don't know if I'm certain there are chemicals released that help me when I cry. I gotta tell you, crying's pretty cool in a lot of ways. It helps me a lot. And then just finding comfort. A lot of times when I'm feeling stressed out, I put a hoodie on and I put the hood up, and that makes me feel better. If I wear a hat, for some reason, it makes me feel more calm. I don't know why, but it does. Listening to things like sports radio or podcasts, people talking, helps me a lot because I feel less lonely. But I don't listen to things about tech because I don't want to think about that, because I can often get engaged and well, this guy's young. I don't want to get down that road. So I actually don't listen to tech stuff. I listen to a lot of comedy stuff and sports stuff, football and football. So, just talking to trusted people and hugging people. Hugging, for me, it's like this, I don't know how to explain it, but for me, it is this empathic connection when you hug somebody. And it's like, I feel you. And that just does that for me. That feeling of that connection of somebody wrapping their arms around you and holding on to you is like telling me you're okay. And that just always makes me feel better if I can do that. And a lot of times I'm in a shitty mood and I don't want to fucking hug. No, but that the problem is I feel separated from people and I'm scared. And that comforts me. So I know I'm way over my time. Helping friends and coworkers is varies for everyone. I'm not an expert. The key things, help them feel safe, listen to them, understand what it's like for them, try to. Help them feel safe and connected. If you try to understand that, you try to be empathic towards them. That's the key thing, is to fight that loneliness. Acknowledge their frustration. They're probably very frustrated by how they feel and how they behave. They know that this is problematic. They know that it screws things up for them. So acknowledge that. And know that for a lot of folks, change is really, really terrifying. If you have a tendency to have these huge stress reactions to things, when things change, that freaks them out a lot. I know it does to me. It freaks me out a lot. If people just discuss potential change, I get scared, really scared. And I often find that when it happens or change is coming, ask them how they feel about it. Maybe kind of take them aside one-on-one, talk to them in advance. That kind of stuff really helps. So there's some resources here I want to go through. These are all listed on my website too, and slides I've already posted on the OSCON site, so you can take a look. But the key thing is, if you want to help with this, talk about this stuff. Share this stuff. Talk more openly about it. Talk about it, email it, tweet it, post it. I don't care if you talk about this talk. I don't care if you talk about Paul Fenwick's talk. I don't care if you send around stuff for the Dev Press Forum, which is a great forum for developers to talk about stuff. You talk about the Blue Hackers or bluehackers.org. Just talk about it. Share with it. Let people understand that they're not alone. I have this link here at functron.com/OSMI. I put together, there's videos and a bunch of links to all those resources that I've got, things like that. I take videos, try to take videos of all the talks that I give. You can share those with people if they want to see that. But like I said, I'm not the only person doing this kind of stuff. So if it's not mine, find other resources, talk to people, make them feel not alone, and please end this stigma so we can talk about this openly and freely. People do not feel so goddamn lonely and disconnected anymore. So, thank you for listening. I'm way over my time, but I think this is essentially the end of all the talks. If anybody wants to ask a question right now, totally fine. If you want to stick around, I'm willing to talk, or just talk me out here, whatever. If anybody have a question they want to just ask in front of the group? Okay, two. I'll get you first, because you raised your hand first.
Just a comment. I just wanted to say thanks for putting this on.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
From my point of view, especially I struggle with a lot of this stuff, but I think in work especially, there's kind of a fear like you can't let your boss know that you're struggling with this, or you're going to get fucking fired.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say thanks for trying to get some of this stuff.
Cool. Very good. Thanks, man. What were you going to say?
So you you talked about having stress responses to things you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Have you, in your travels, I guess, heard about other people who don't have stress responses when they should? Because I feel like that's one of the pluses of what I experienced.
I think so, and I think that that would be the most awesome thing in the world, kind of. I mean, yeah, I guess it's a hard thing because if you're trying to define a mental illness, like a lot of times what it is this person just behaves in what they call a non-neurotypical way, and really it's like, well, this person just acts differently, so there's some question about whether illness is the right word for all this stuff, right? I have heard of things like that. I cannot say that I know jack about it. So about like why that is and how that is. For some reason, some people have different sort of responses for that. So I kind of wish I had that because I feel like my life would be a lot easier.
I think it may be because I feel more comfortable doing lessons out of their own.
Oh, is that right?
So
that's interesting.
And I, partially because of that, I also feel really comfortable around foreigners or people who are new to the culture.
I see.
They don't understand.
I could see that. That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I could think that. That's an interesting take on it. Let's think about that a little bit. Well, anyway, thanks for coming. If you want to talk to me, I'm going to be around for a while. Please feel free anytime, or you can hit me on Twitter. Funkatron on Twitter. Go to funkatron.com or funkatron.com/OSMI. Has links to I post up slides, videos, audio recordings from all the times I've given this talk. Post up the resources. So please just share the info, talk about it, help me with this. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.